Hello! Okay, in this video we're going to start talking about the Homeric poems, and this is a challenge for me because I love the Homeric poems, but I can't talk about them forever, so here we go. Alright, so during the early Iron Age we witness the composition of what are known as epic poems. Now, an epic poem is simply a long narrative poem. It tells a story. And the stories of these early Iron Age epic poems focused on the deeds of gods and men. And really, these men are heroes. They are generally the children or grandchildren of the Greek gods through their sort of intermingling with human people. And so they are greater than regular men. They're stronger and they're better fighters and all of these kinds of things. So it's the deeds of these kinds of people. And if you know your Greek mythology, you'll have heard of many of them. People like Hercules and Perseus and Theseus and Achilles. These poems we know are being composed and being told in the early Iron Age. They could be even older. It's hard to pin down. And they are also the products of what we call oral composition. So these are poems that are told by storytellers who have memorized the poems and recite them as a form of entertainment. And they pass them down to the next generation who learn them pretty precisely, despite their very great length. They learn them kind of word for word. And they may make changes over time. They might add to it to improve it. They might make changes to suit the audience they're talking to at the time, focus in on someone who's special to that region, for instance. And so over time, these poems grow and expand and change. So they're kind of like living things. And at some point, these poems get written down. And there's a lot of debate on when that happens, but probably it's not until around the 6th century BC that these poems finally get written down. Before that, for centuries before that, they were just oral pieces. They were just spoken. Now, probably there were a lot of epic poems that were composed and told during the early Iron Age about all sorts of heroes from across the Greek world. Only 2 have survived intact, though. And we know there's more than these 2 because we have fragments of others, right, that suggest that there were other big compositions that are just gone now. But the 2 that survive are the Iliad and the Odyssey. They're known as the Homeric poems because they are attributed to an author named Homer. But like I said, these are the products of oral composition. They were composed and expanded upon and changed over the course of centuries, and they were worked on by many, many storytellers across Greece. So there's no one person who wrote them. Homer is more likely to be a kind of pseudo-historical, more like mythical figure who may have been invented later as the writer of the Iliad and the Odyssey, but it's unlikely that there was any such person as Homer. But they're still called the Homeric poems. They are lengthy. The Iliad is about 15,000 lines. The Odyssey is about 12,000 lines of poetry. Later, after they were written down finally, they were divided into chapters. Really, we call them books. So they were each divided into 24 books, just to create smaller pieces that could be recited and memorized or copied. But originally they're just these big, long poems. So, the Iliad and the Odyssey both tell stories from the Greek mythological saga known as the Trojan War. And in case you're not familiar with it, I'm going to try to describe it to you. I will just note right now, there's a lot of Greek myth. Pretty much every figure who shows up in Greek myth has their own legends associated with them. We could really get bogged down. I'm going to try not to. I'm going to try to keep it kind of bare bones, just give you enough to understand what these poems are about. Alright, so to start the Trojan War, we actually have to go back quite a bit. So there was a wedding of Peleus and Thetis. Thetis was a goddess, Peleus was a hero. That actually doesn't matter. I'm already getting bogged down. But the wedding saw all the gods come. Now, all the gods and goddesses were invited except Eris, who was the Greek goddess of strife, because probably she was going to cause trouble. They didn't want to invite her. She got mad about that and decided to cause trouble. So she created a golden apple. And on the apple she wrote, "To the fairest." And she threw this apple into the wedding banquet. And immediately 3 goddesses seized it and claimed it as their own because they all believed they were the fairest of all. And these 3 goddesses included Hera, who is the queen of the gods and a goddess of women and family, Athena, and she's the wife of Zeus, the head god. Athena, who is a daughter of Zeus and a goddess of warfare and wisdom. And Aphrodite, who is the goddess of love and beauty and sex and romance and all these things. So they each claim it, and they go to Zeus to settle the matter. And Zeus says, I'm absolutely not going to get involved in this, because whoever I pick, I'm going to make 2 enemies. So instead he says, I'm going to send you to just some random person, and he'll have to decide and deal with the consequences of it. And so he picks a guy named Paris, who is a shepherd in the countryside of the city of Troy. So we're going to shoot over to the map. I know it's kind of far away. I don't know how well you can see. But remember, this is Asia Minor, modern Turkey. The city of Troy is a real city. It's up here on the north, right at the Hellespont, kind of near the mouth of the Hellespont. So that's where Paris is. And he is a shepherd in the countryside. But secretly, Paris is a prince of Troy. And in fact, let's see if I can move my camera over to our family trees. Paris is the son of Priam and Hecuba, the king and queen of Troy. He's one of the sons. Priam is supposed to have over 50 sons and 50 daughters, so he's a busy guy. But when Paris was born, there was a prophecy that he would destroy Troy. And so he was exposed. They took this baby and they left him in the wilderness to die. But he was found by shepherds and raised by them. And so there he is, a shepherd in the countryside, not really knowing his true ancestry. And one day, 3 naked goddesses appear to him and say, which of us is the most beautiful? And this is known as the judgment of Paris. Each of the goddesses offers him a prize if they pick him. So Athena offers him an unconquerable army. Hera offers to make him the king of all the kingdoms on earth. And Aphrodite offers him the most beautiful woman in the world as a wife. And he decides to pick Aphrodite. The most beautiful woman in the world at the time is Helen. Helen is a daughter of Zeus, who he said is the main god, the king of the gods, and Leda, who is a mortal woman that he raped, right, and impregnated. And she had Helen, and Helen has some brothers as well. Because Helen was so beautiful, when she was old enough to get married, there was a lot of competition. All the chieftains, all the basileus in Greece wanted to marry her. And she ultimately chose Menelaus, who is the chieftain of the city of Sparta, right? And actually, all the other suitors had to swear an oath that said they wouldn't interfere with the marriage, they would never try to kidnap her away, and also, if anyone kidnaps her, they're going to help get her back. And this was so that no one would be resentful or try anything after Helen made her choice. So she marries Menelaus, and she becomes queen of Sparta. Now, Paris has been promised Helen as his wife. So Paris, first of all, Aphrodite sends him back to Troy to reclaim his birthright. And since he's now an adult and Troy hasn't fallen, they welcome him back, and they recognize him as a prince of Troy. From there, he gets a ship and he sails to Sparta, and he is taken in as a guest of Menelaus and Helen. They welcome him as a prince of a major city. Menelaus is then called away to go to a funeral, and while he is gone, Paris takes Helen and all of Menelaus's wealth, all his treasures, puts it on a ship and sails away. It is unclear if Helen was willing. There's a lot of versions of this story told in the ancient world. Sometimes Helen seems willing, sometimes not. Sometimes she's put under a spell by Aphrodite. It's very unclear. So he takes her back to Troy, and Menelaus needs to get his wife back. So he invokes this old oath that says, okay, someone kidnapped my wife. All these chieftains of Greece now have to come help me get her back. And so he gathers a huge army. He's not the captain of it. The chief of the army is actually his brother Agamemnon, who is the king of the city of Mycenae. And so Agamemnon leads all of these many Greek chieftains and heroes to the city of Troy. They reach the city, and they camp. Troy's right on the beach, so they camp right on the beach by their ships. And they start to try to break into the city of Troy. Troy's walls are unassailable. You can't get into that city. It's kind of a hopeless effort. And the city is also defended by its army. Priam's very old, so his oldest son Hector defends the walls of Troy, right, and defends Troy from the invasions of the Greeks. So this battle goes on for 10 years. For 10 years, the Greeks are camped on the beaches of Troy. For 10 years, they try to enter the city, and for 10 years, they fail to do so, and the Trojans keep just pushing them away. All right, so the Iliad takes place in year 10 of that conflict. I know this is a lot of setup. So let's go back, and we'll erase this one. We'll go back to this board. Okay. So we're in year 10 of the Trojan War, and the issue arises between Agamemnon, who remember is the chief of the Greek armies, and Achilles. Achilles is one of these Greek chieftains who's there in the army, and he is in fact the greatest of the Greek warriors. He is the son of a goddess. His mother's Thetis. It's her wedding that caused all the problems in the beginning. And so he is just the greatest, the strongest, the best of the warriors of Greece. At the beginning of the Iliad, Agamemnon has a concubine, a kind of a war prize, a woman he took in battle as a spoil for war. And she has to be returned to her father, right? He has to give her back to her father. And he does not want to be left without a prize, because that would be shameful for him to have lost a prize and to have less than the others. So he takes Achilles' concubine, one of his concubines, right, to make up for it. Achilles now is very angry. He's lost his concubine, and since these prizes of war are given out by the army to the greatest warriors and are a symbol of the honor that they have in this community, it's very shameful for him to lose this. And so Achilles becomes so enraged that he quits battle. He says, I'm not fighting for you anymore. Not only that, like that's bad enough, he then prays to his mother, remember is a goddess, and says, ask Zeus to punish the Greeks. Right? Because they dishonored me. And so what we see in the next part of the Iliad is that the Trojans begin to win the battles against the Greeks, to the point where the Trojans invade the Greek camp. Right? The Greeks are all camped there on the beach, and they have built walls and ditches to protect themselves, and now, after 10 years, the Hector leads the Trojans, and they burst into the Greek camp. The Greeks are in an incredible amount of danger. And so Achilles' friend Patroclus, and his status is debated. He is described in the Iliad as a close friend, and he's a cousin of Achilles. In other versions, in later versions, he is seen as a lover of Achilles. But Patroclus is very upset by this. He sees his compatriots dying, and he says to Achilles, I need to go to battle and to help. And so he takes the armor of Achilles, and he enters battle. He's supposed to just push the Trojans back out of the Greek camp, but he gets a little greedy, a little ambitious, and he tries to chase them back to the city of Troy, and he tries to take the walls of Troy, and he is struck down by the god Apollo, as well as a human being called Euphorbus. And then finally Hector, the Trojan leader, comes over and he finishes Patroclus off. When Achilles learns about this, he is enraged. He returns to battle, with the goal of avenging the death of Patroclus. He murders a lot of Trojans. He pushes them back to the city. They're all hiding inside the city. And then he calls out Hector, right? And he says, I want to fight you in single combat, right? I want to defeat you. Hector knows he's going to die, right? He knows he doesn't really have a chance, but he goes out anyway because it would be dishonorable not to. And he enters single combat with Achilles. He is killed. And Achilles then does a dishonorable thing. He takes the corpse of Hector, and instead of returning it for burial, he disrespects it. He ties it to his chariot and drags it through the countryside. He lets dogs gnaw on it. It's considered very bad, the way that Achilles has treated the corpse of another warrior. And so the gods send Hector's father Priam, and they lead him into the Greek camp, and he offers ransom, right, treasures, in exchange for his son corpse so that he can bring it back to Troy and give it a proper burial. And the Iliad ends with that, with Priam bringing the corpse of Hector back for its burial. So yeah, it's actually just a really small part of the entire Trojan War, but a significant one. The Odyssey, on the other hand, happens after the end of the Trojan War. So if you don't know, the Trojan War ends with the Greeks entering the city of Troy through a trick. They build what's known as the Trojan horse. It's a giant wooden horse. They hide soldiers in there, and when the Greeks bring it inside their walls, when the Trojans bring it inside their walls, the Greek warriors are able to come out and open the gates of Troy and let the army in. And so the Greeks destroy the city of Troy. There are a number of stories about what happens to the Greek heroes on their way home. A lot of them have misadventures, but none more so than the Greek chieftain Odysseus, who comes from Ithaca, right, which is an island off the western coast of Greece. And there he is chieftain. So he starts his journey home, but he runs into some complications. And arguably the worst of these, is he visits an island where there are the Cyclops, these giants with one eye on their heads. And he is captured, he and some of his men are captured by one. He escapes by blinding that Cyclops. And he brags about it to the Cyclops. And he says, oh, I'm Odysseus, and I'm the one who out-tricked you. And the Cyclops prays to his father, who happens to be Poseidon, the god of the sea, and says, avenge me. And so Poseidon makes it essentially impossible for Odysseus to get home, right? Odysseus wanders for 10 years before he can get back home, and he has all these troubles. He hits the sirens and the witch Circe, and he has to go to the underworld and talk with the dead, all sorts of things. And he ends up losing all of his men in the process until he finally manages to return back home to Ithaca. And when he gets there, he finds out that his wife, Penelope, is still alive, but his palace is full of suitors who are trying to marry her and become the next king of Ithaca. And so he disguises himself as a beggar and enters the palace to see the situation. And then he makes a plan to murder the suitors. He enlists the help of his son, Telemachus, who was a baby the last time he saw him 20 years ago, as well as one or two other friends. And together they slaughter all the suitors. And the Odyssey ends pretty much just after that, right? After Odysseus has reclaimed his throne and been reunited with his family. So that is the basic plot of both the Iliad and the Odyssey. And I'm sorry, that was kind of as quick as I could do it. I could talk about the Homeric poems for quite a while. Yes, we'll stop there. All right, thanks for listening, and yeah.